All right, let me ask you this. I want you to think back. What are the things that your parents did that you swore you would never do? Right? Like, you can think back to you remember this? Like how many of you had the parent that would fall asleep on the couch at like 8 o'clock watching TV? I'm never going to do that, right? How many of you had the parent that was always complaining about all the bills and all the adult stuff and you know? How many of you had the dad that was the light Nazi or the thermostat Nazi, right? Nobody can touch it. It's only... And as a child, you grow up with that, and you're like, I am not going to be like my parent. Now, for me, I don't know if you remember this. My mom, like, she had her chair. And every time she'd get up out of that chair, you know what happened, right? It was that noise. That noise that parents make, it's like a deep, like almost like a constipated grunt. And they're like, why do you make that sound just getting up out of the chair? And I remember like my mom doing this guy, and I was like, there's no way that I'm going to do that when I become an adult. And I'm like, do I need to be in shape? Like, what do I have to do? I'm not going to be that parent. Until you turn to your mid-40s. And you get up out of that chair, and you're like, holy moly, that grunt is there every time. It is terrible. It's like this old identity that runs deeper than my intentions. And every single time I get out of that chair, I feel that same grunt my mom had. In fact, it reminds me of Publishers Clearinghouse. Like, I don't think Publishers Clearinghouse is still a thing. But Publishers Clearinghouse used to be this thing where you would order a magazine and you'd be entered into the sweepstake. And if you won the sweepstake, then after the Super Bowl, Ed McMahon would come knock on your door and you'd get this big check for $10 million. Anybody remember watching that? Now, like, my family, like, my mom, she didn't have a lot of money growing up. And so every year, though, we'd get that Publishers Clearinghouse, and we'd sign up for one of those magazines, and I don't know which one we got. And I was convinced after the Super Bowl that Ed McMahon was going to knock on my door and give me a check for, and it was going to change everything. It was going to be amazing. It never happened. It just, you know, he got the wrong address. But what's fascinating is when you consider the research about people who win the lottery or people who end up with this huge free fall of money given to them, how many of those people ended up broke after a few years? You're like, hold up, you win like millions of dollars and somehow after a couple of years you end up broke? How does that happen? It's not because of bad luck. It's because new money does not produce a new identity. So like if my mom would have won that money, like my mom was great, but she wasn't good with money. She wasn't. And so if my mom got all this new money, like her financial instincts would have been the same. Her relationship with money would have been the same as it was before. It just would have been scaled to a much bigger level. More money with the same operating system typically is going to lead to the same results. Because the operating system is always going to win eventually, right? Like you can change the circumstances, but the patterns are still ingrained. The thought processes are still ingrained because the patterns are not about circumstances. They run deeper than that. You ever felt that? You ever felt like there's a gap between your intentions and your nature? Oh, I want to do this. I don't want to be the guy that makes a grunt getting up. But my nature is every time I get up out of that chair, there's that grunt, right? In fact, I've read a lot of books about productivity, trying to figure out how to be a better leader. And one of the books I read was a book called Miracle Morning. And this book talks about like the most productive people. They get up early in the morning and they do these 5 or 6 things. And they're like, here's the key to this though. You have to get up earlier than you think you need to. Now, I love this idea of being more productive. Like I have like ADHD and all those things, squirrel, and I'm like, I need to get focused. I would love to do this. The problem is I'm not a morning person. But I'm like, okay, I'm going to be productive. So this is what I'll do. I'll set my alarm 5:30. My wife's laughing. I don't set it at 5:30. I'll set my alarm at whatever time I set it to. And I have every intent on waking up. Every intent. I'm going to be productive. Until that dumb alarm goes off. And I start negotiating with that alarm. Oh, well, if I just pause it for a few more minutes, I hit snooze one more time, it's okay. And it's kind of like there's these two versions within inside of me. These two versions that are the same Kevin. It's the person I want to be in my default mode. And there's this gap in between that causes me not to get up when I'm supposed to wake up. There's a gap between my desire to change and my default. And for many of us, it runs deeper than just an alarm clock in the morning. Many of us, as we're thinking about that gap between who we want to be and who we are, we start thinking about our anger. Man, I don't want to be an angry person. But there's a gap between my anger and my desire. A gap between our negativity. A gap in our bitterness. A gap in our fear. Our gap in the things that we turn to cope. Our addictions. Oh, we want to change. We want to get better for ourselves and for our family. But that gap between desire and actual change seems like it is ginormous. Which leads me to the question I feel like I want to ask this morning. That's probably relevant to many of us in this room. The question is, why do I keep falling back the same patterns when I really want to change? Or maybe another way to say that is, why do I keep getting in my own way from the change I want to experience? We are in a series called Grasping in Grace, where we've been studying the life of Jacob from the book of Genesis. And Jacob is such a good guy because he has spent his life grasping. He's a self-sufficient man. He's been able to grasp and get whatever he wanted. And we've watched as God's been in this process of transforming Jacob from being a man defined by grasping to being a man defined by grace. And it's going to come to a head next week. We're going to read about a WWF wrestling match, and it's going to be the highlight to Jacob's story. But today, I love where we're at today, the passage that Abby read for us this morning, because I think this story is where many of us would find ourselves. Our faith is growing. We desire to follow God, but there's a gap between our faith and our old nature. That we understand God's given us this new identity, this new nature as a child of God, and sometimes it's a struggle living in this new identity because we're still managing into this old identity, this old nature that's still inside of ourselves. And I love this passage because God and his grace is going to expose that gap, the gap between our intention and real life. And he's going to expose that in Jacob in order for him to fully transform him. So our message today is titled Two Camps, and we're going to look at just a couple of points. Jacob, if we remember where we were last week, Jacob is now heading into the promised land. He's going back to the place where his family was from. And if you remember when Jacob left the promised land, his brother, Jacob stole the blessing from him, his brother wanted to kill him, right? It's been a long time coming. So Jacob is going back to everything that he ran away from. And on the road, God's going to show up. On the way back, God shows up. Number one, God announces his presence to Jacob. It says in chapter 32, Genesis 32, verse 1, it says, Jacob was on the way, and God's angels met him. In fact, when you think about that, we have heard this before. Right? In Genesis chapter 28, when Jacob was actually fleeing from his murderous brother, remember what happened? God gave Jacob this vision of a ladder or a stairway. And the angels were ascending and descending, and you got to see this idea, hey, God is with you. God is with you. He has angels working for you. And 20 years later, God is reminding Jacob of that same thing. He allows Jacob to see this unseen reality. That the behind the scenes, even though you're facing some difficult circumstances, you're fearful of what's going to happen with your brother, God is gracious in saying, hey, look, I'm still with you. My angels are still fighting for you. We got you. And what's significant and what I love about this is Jacob, like he's not done anything yet, right? Jacob has made no plans on how he's going to reunite with his brother. He doesn't know what's going to happen. He doesn't know what his plans are. So before Jacob can do anything, God gives him this vision of these angels. And the sequence is super intentional. Because God is trying to say, hey, Jacob, I'm with you, bro. I'm going to protect you. I've got plans for you. I'm not done with you yet. And so Jacob sees these angels, and he responds in verse 2, and this is what he says. He says, this is God's camp, and he called the place Mahanaim. And that word, Mahanaim, don't ask me how to pronounce it. I'm just making it up. It means two camps. And so what you have this picture of is you've got these two camps. You've got Jacob's camp, all his people, all his stuff, and you've got God's camp. These are the two camps, and they are side by side. And you got to think about what this means for Jacob. Jacob is entering into unknown territory. What am I going to find from my brother? Is he still trying to kill me? What's it going to be like? And this would have been a reminder to Jacob, listen, you're not operating alone. You are not alone. You've got the God of angel armies on your side. Can you imagine how much confidence that would give? I mean, you think about whatever hard thing you have in front of you. Oh, I've got this big thing at work. I've got this family thing. How encouraging would it be for God to give you a vision to remind you, I'm with you, you're not alone? Like, how much confidence would that give you to walk into this and be like, we got this, God. Man, this is going to be great. Because I'm not alone. I've got God on my side. Do you know the same thing that happened for Jacob is true for you and I as well? See, in Psalm chapter 91, the Psalm says, God commands his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. I don't know all that's going on in your world right now, but how gracious is God to give us that reminder that God commands all of his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. And how good is that? How gracious is God to reveal that to us this morning? Now, here's the irony, though, I don't want us to miss. Jacob names this place two camps, right? God's camp and my camp side by side, which is awesome. But the rest of this passage, all Jacob's going to focus on, he's going to forget as if like God's camp wasn't there. He's going to spend the rest of this passage focusing on his camp, trying to deal with his camp, and not acknowledging the camp that God has right beside him. The presence of God was real. The reminder was real. But it wasn't enough to close the gap between faith and life. So Number one, God shows himself to Jacob. Number two, fear exposes what where Jacob's trust ultimately lies. So Jacob gets on with this. He sends his messengers ahead to Esau. He's like, I want you to go tell Esau, hey, your brother's coming back to greet you. He's got a lot of money. I hope everything's okay. I hope everything's good. And the messengers, they return with this, their very ominous report. Verse 6. They say, your brother is coming to meet you, and he's got 400 men with him. Now, in that culture, like 400 men, that's an army, right? That's an army. And it says in verse 7 that Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. Can you blame him? Like you left your brother, and he wanted to murder you, and now he's coming after you with 400 men. I can't blame him, right? But I want to be careful because Esau's intentions are never stated in this text. The messengers never say, hey, Jacob, your brother's still really mad. He's going to come and destroy you. It simply says he's coming with 400 men. And here's what happens. Jacob has guilt. Jacob's guilt is filling in the rest of the details of the story, right? I mean, how many of us have ever been in that situation where we know we've done wrong to somebody, and we've got this guilt and the shame, And we hear a little snippet of something, and our guilt and shame will rewrite the rest of the story for us. Oh, yeah, of course Esau's angry. Of course he's going to destroy me because 20 years ago I stole the blessing from him. We don't read that in the text. That's what's happening. But of course, Jacob, with his guilt and his shame, is speaking into the story. Because that's what guilt and shame does, right? The other thing about fear is fear exposes what is going on underneath. Fear has this tremendous way of exposing what's going on inside of us. Because remember, the God of angel armies just showed up to Jacob. God just gave him the vision of all the angels. Hey, the angels are with you. God's on your side. You're not alone. But look what Jacob does. Verse 7, it says, he divided his people with him into 2 camps, along with the flocks and the herds and the camels. And he thought, if Esau attacks one, the remaining camp will escape. You hear this idea? Like, he just said he's going to divide his people into 2 camps, right? Which is interesting because he just talked about 2 camps. We just talked about there are 2 camps. There's God's camp and your camp. And now Jacob is saying, I'm not trusting God's camp. We're going to put that camp on the side. I'm going to take my own 2 camps, right? Jacob is turning to self-sufficiency. It's the old operating system coming back online at the moment that the pressure arrives. Do you see that? The moment the pressure arrives, Jacob falls back into old patterns. And here's the thing. And this is true for all of us in this room. God's presence does not automatically produce trust. God can show up and do some remarkable things, but it doesn't automatically produce trust. The reality is, there are some people who have been in church a long time. There are some people that have believed, man, God is for me for a long time. But the moment that the fear comes, the moment the pressure hits, those people start building their own camp. Right? Because this is where we live in this, oftentimes with this gap between our faith and life. Oh, I believe God. I trust God until the pressure hits. And then the pressure hits and I get afraid. And then I start focusing and I'm going to figure it out myself. I'm going to solve it myself. I'm going to turn to all these other means rather than trusting God. I mean, how many of us would say this has been my story? Moments when God shows up and I'm like, God, I love you. I'm for you. Until the pressure hits. And then it's like, hold up, God, I'm going to go do my own thing. And what's remarkable about this is God is not angry at Jacob. No, God is exposing something in him. And it's so significant because God's desire is to change Jacob from being a person defined by grasping to be defined by grace. And here's the thing, God cannot transform something that has not been surfaced. God cannot transform something that has not been surfaced. And so when we have this fear and this self-reliance and this divided trust inside of us, God has to expose that so he can begin to transform it. And that's what God is doing with Jacob. He's bringing Jacob to the point of total surrender. So Jacob literally has nothing else to hold on to. And the reality is there's sometimes that God will do the same thing in our lives. Bring us to the point of total surrender. So that way that gap in the middle, man, we can't hold on to that anymore. So Jacob is scared. His self-reliance is activated. And it's almost surprising what happens next. Number 3 for us this morning is we're going to see faith begin to surface. Because here in the middle of this, Jacob's dividing his people into 2 camps, and he stops in the middle of this and he prays. And I'm not talking about one of those like quickie prayers, you know, like good food, good meat, good God, let's eat. Like he prays like this beautiful prayer, probably one of the most spiritually mature things that Jacob has done in his entire life. And it's great because you begin to see his faith surfacing in the fear. And he prays, And he starts with God's identity in verse 9. He prays and says, God, my father, God of my father, of Abraham and Isaac, the Lord who said to me, go back to your land and your family, because that I have caused you to prosper. See, I love this because he starts this prayer and he's not approaching some stranger. He's not like you, some, I don't know, unknown God. No, this is the covenant God. The God who made promises to Abraham, his grandfather. The God who made promises to Isaac, his father. The God who made promises to him himself. He's saying, listen, I'm praying to the faithful God. He has proven himself faithful. And then he starts with that. Then he confesses his unworthiness in verse 10. He says, I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness that you have shown me. And again, I want you to see this because this is a growing faith in Jacob. Jacob is a self-sufficient guy, the guy who figured out how to get everything done himself. He's grasped for life. And now you see him humbling himself. He recognizes, man, it wasn't me. I recognize my emptiness. It's been you all along, God. So he humbles himself and says, man, I am unworthy. And then verse 11, he makes a specific request to God. He says, please rescue me from my brother Esau, for I am afraid of him. I love that Jacob does this. He says, God, here's what I need. I need you to rescue me from my brother. But then did you hear him say what he's afraid of? He names his fear out loud. God, I need you to rescue me because I am afraid of Esau. He doesn't dress up his fear. He doesn't spiritualize his fear. He says simply, God, this is what I'm afraid of. And what we have to understand is God already knows all of our fears. He knows all of our thoughts. He knows all of our feelings. He knows all of our emotions. But do you understand there is a freedom and a power that comes from us simply acknowledging these things to God? Acknowledging, God, I got some fear here. I don't know how this is going to work out. I'm afraid of what's going to happen. Now, what would it look like for us to be that transparent with God? He already knows. Just be like, God, I'm fearful for this. I'm fearful for that. I'm giving this to you. And then Jacob closes here in verse 12 in his prayer by appealing to God's word. He says, God, you said that I caused you to prosper and to make your offspring like the sand of the sea, too numerous to be counted. He is anchoring his request in the promises of God. God, you promised this. God, you said this. And I'm going to repeat it to you. I'm going to say this again to you, not saying, God, give me these things, but simply, God, I'm going to remind you of the promises that you've made, because you are a faithful promise keeper. And I'm going to quote this back to you. Now, I want you to see in this prayer, like Jacob's faith is real. Like we've talked about him having this growing faith, like his faith is genuine, right? He knows what God has promised. And this moment when he's got fear and he's got this enormous pressure, I love this because you see his faith surfacing. You see his faith breaking through. But the gap between faith and life. Because number 4 for us, Jacob is still trusting his own plans. And the text reads that Jacob selects these gifts from all of his herds. He's got goats and sheep and camel and donkeys and ducks and whatever else they got. And he sends hundreds of animals ahead in waves, like multiple waves. And he tells his servants, listen, when you go and meet Esau, I want you to tell Esau, these gifts are from your servant. They're from your baby brother, the one you wanted to kill all those years ago. And this is a very deliberate strategy that as Jacob tries to send multiple waves of gifts, he's trying to soften Esau. So that by the time Jacob arrives, Esau's anger is overwhelmed by all of the stuff that he's been given. Now, I wanted to pause for a moment because I think sometimes you read a text like this. I want us to know that God is not anti-plans, right? Wisdom is a gift from God. Planning is not the problem. Because some of you are really good planners and you're like, man, I'll look at a problem and I'll figure out a solution. Listen, God is not anti-plan. But the problem is what the plans reveal. Because verse 20, you get to see the heart behind the plans. Jacob says, I want to appease Esau with the gift going ahead of me, and after that I can face him, and perhaps he can forgive me. That word appease, in the original language, is this fancy word called kippur. And the root word of appease, of kippur, is atonement. You see what we're doing here? Jacob is trying with livestock to give what only God can give. That these gifts are not just strategy, they are misplaced trust. Jacob is trusting in his own, what he can accomplish. And again, like he just prayed and said, God, would you deliver me? He just prayed. And now he's saying, I'm trying to atone on my own. I'm trying to give these gifts to appease and atone for what I've done. And that right there is the gap. That is the gap between faith and trust. That faith surfaced in prayer and that self-reliance surfaced in the plan. Both of them are real. And both of them are running simultaneously. And they expose this divided trust. You know, next week we're going to see this amazing story where God meets Jacob at the riverbank, and they're going to wrestle all night long, and God's going to give Jacob a new name and a new identity. The most significant moment of his entire life. And the day before this happens, Jacob is sending these waves of animals to his brother, trying to manage the outcome. And again, I got to clarify, God's not angry with Jacob for this. God's not done with Jacob. He's not surprised. He is simply exposing the gap between faith and self-reliance. So that way, at that moment of wrestling, Jacob has nothing left to hold on to. And it will be finally at the point of full surrender. So this message is really going to carry into the message next week. So you need to come back. But here's our summary. Here's our big idea for today. Is that God exposes the gap between our faith and our self-reliance before he transforms us. Because listen to this, you cannot receive a new identity while still managing your old one. We cannot embrace and live in the identity that God has given us when we are still trying to manage and hold on to that old nature within us, that old identity. Let me ask you, where do you see yourself in this story? Like when the pressure hits, when the fear comes, I mean, your faith is genuine. You're praying, God, I need you. But how quick does self-reliance begin to take over? Do you see in your life the gap between faith and life? And I'll tell you, sometimes the temptation is we come to church and we hear a message like this and we're like, oh yes, Kevin, I'm going to try harder. Oh, Kevin, I'm going to try harder. I'm going to pray harder. I'm going to read more of my Bible. Yeah, I'm going to trust. I'm going to be better. Do you know that's not the answer I want you to hear today? Because the word that Jacob used, again, kippur, appease, atone. Jacob was trying to purchase his own reconciliation from Esau. The gifts were trying to cover a debt that ultimately Esau could never pay. But 2,000 years later, God sent Jesus to close that gap that Jacob couldn't. Not with animals and not with waves of gifts. No, God sent his son, Jesus. And that word that we read, appease, atone, it finds its ultimate meaning on the cross. When Jesus became the covering for Jacob and for all of us, the covering that we could not manufacture on our own. You see, that gap in our life, that gap in our faith between belief and faith and trusting in ourselves, right? That gap can't be made up with. It can't be made up on our own. It can't be made up with plans and effort and management and trying harder. No, that gap is made up simply by the grace of God. which means the solution is not to try harder. The work has already been done. You don't have to manage your way out of this reconciliation. You already have it. The question is not whether we are living in that reality that we are in the camp of God. We are. The question is, are we still going to send livestock ahead just in case? So, 2 points of application, and then we'll wrap up. Number one, first thing I want you to do in response to this is let's be willing to identify and name your default management system and the old identity that you are still trying to manage. Because I'll be honest, we all have one. We all have one of these. When the pressure hits, when the fear comes, what's your default move? What's your default move? How many of you are the controller? Oh, I'm going to tighten down. I'm going to be in control of all things. I can do this. I'll figure it out, right? Some of us, when the frustration hits, there's that person we're going to call. We're going to talk to them, and they're going to talk us through it. Oh, well, it's Mother's Day. Mom, you got to solve this for me, Mom. I don't know what to do. You got to tell me what to do, and I'm just going to do whatever you say to do. Some of us, we're that person that when the pressure hits, we lay in bed and we rehearse our conversations hour upon hour, again and again and again. That's how we respond when the pressure hits. I'm gonna just continue thinking about this. Some of us, when the pressure hits, we get so ruled by fear that we literally freeze and can't do anything. Listen, when the pressure hits and when the fear comes, what is your default management system? Because here's what I want you to do. When you notice it this week, when the pressure hits, when the fear comes, when the anxiety kicks in, before you start researching on your phone, before you start texting people for advice, before you start trying to figure out the plan to control everything, I want you to stop and take 60 seconds. And I want you to say, God, am I doing this because it is wise? Or am I doing this because I am not trusting you? A simple question to evaluate your heart. God, you've given us the vision. We've got the God of angel armies on our side. You are fighting for us. God, your camp is right here. Am I doing this because this is wise and what you're asking me to do? Or am I doing this because I'm going to set your camp over here? I'm going to focus on building my camps just like Jacob did. What is the pattern for that default system for you? Control, obsessive research, avoid. What is that gap between faith and life? And once you do that, I also want you to literally name it aloud, right? Because Jacob's self-reliance, his old identity, man, it surfaced. The gifts to Esau were not just a strategy. They were old Jacob doing what Jacob does. That was his old identity. And we all have this old identity as well. Again, it has a name. Some of us will acknowledge, I am the controller. I will control everything. Some of us would say, I'm the performer. Like my nature is I got to perform, and if I can perform enough, then everything will be good. We're people pleasers, right? Some of us, we disappear when things get hard because, man, I don't know how to deal with the hard, so I'm just going to fade into the background and run off into the sunset so I don't have to deal with it. Some of us, we're the person that doesn't ask for help. Oh, I got to do it on my own. I won't ask for help. I'm self-made. I'm proud. Some of us, we're the person that freaks out. The proverbial stuff hits the fan and we freak out. See, it's so significant for us to actually be able to identify our old nature, our old pattern. In fact, I would encourage you to do this. Answer this question. Answer this question. My default system under pressure. My original identity is this. I'm the controller. I'm the overreactor. I'm the people pleaser. I'm the person motivated by guilt and shame and not by joy. When you identify that, man, tell that to someone around you. Tell that to your spouse, to a friend, to your life group. Confess that. There's so much power in us acknowledging, man, this is my operating system. This is my old nature. This is what I run to when things get hard. So number one, identify and name that default system, the old identity. And number two for us this morning, let's learn to settle ourselves into God's camp. Again, Jacob had everything he needed in the very beginning of the passage. You had God's presence, you had God's angels, you had the promise of God. I'm with you. He had God's camp literally right there for him. The problem was Jacob did not settle himself in God's camp. He said God's camp is not enough, and I've got to go build my own camp. And that's part of the struggle for some of us and for many of us in this room. God, I believe you. I know you're there, but man, I keep trusting in myself. The question becomes, how do we settle in God's camp? How do we settle our hearts and our lives in God's camp? Two simple things. Number one, we've got to remember. We've got to remember those God moments in our lives. Again, we've got to go back to Mahanaim. Maybe not physically, but spiritually and emotionally. Return to what God said. Return to his promises. Return to those times when God has showed up in your life and given you that feeling of peace. Reminded you of his angels that are with you. Plant yourself in moments when God has showed up. Allow that reality to eclipse your present. In fact, for me, here's the way I do this. Here's the way I've learned to remember those God moments in my life. I have a piece of marble on my desk, about that big. And it is not a fancy decoration. It is a reminder of how God showed up in some hard things in my life. It's remarkable. I love going back to that thing because it reminds me of that experience of peace. When God said, I'm with you. I've been with you. All those hard things, I'm there. And I look at this piece of rock and it's a reminder to me, oh yeah, God's presence is here. I want God's camp, not my own. Another one, I used to have this Bible verse card on the dash of my car. It was given to me by Dan and Joy Fitzgerald many years ago as they spoke some wisdom into my life. That was something that God used in a specific way. And so I kept that as a memento on my dash. And you ever wonder why Kevin speeds? It's because that memento was covering my speedometer. It happened to be the case. Hey, what does that look like for you? What are the moments in God's life that God has showed up, that God has spoken, that God has revealed himself? One of those things, maybe you should write that down. Write that in a journal. Write that in your Bible. Put a special memento that reminds you of those things. Find ways to remember and go back to the places that God has met you. And secondly, man, we've got to learn how to rest in God's sovereignty. Right? As soon as the pressure hits, Jacob jumped into managing. Jacob sending gifts. He's strategizing. Ultimately, God's going to meet him at the river regardless. All Jacob needed to do was simply to rest in God's camp, to rest in God's sovereignty. What does it look like for us to rest in it? It's not passivity. To rest in God is not doing anything. To rest in God is simply a decision to say, I believe God's camp is real. I believe that God is for me. I believe that God is working things for my good and for his glory. You know what that means? You don't have to have the solution to your problems today. You don't have to have the solution to the problems tomorrow. Because typically what I find is God's plans are typically a little bit slower than mine. It is a decision to say, I don't know how it's going to work out, but God, I believe you're working. I believe you are here, and I am trusting that you're at work. Psalm 27, beautiful verse I learned a few years ago. It says, God gives sleep to those he loves. Think about how much time we spend wrestling and anxious and running things through our brain, trying to solve it, trying to figure it out. Sleep is an act of trust, saying, God, I can let go of these things because I believe you're going to keep them up. I believe you are still working on them. So I can trust you that I don't have to stay up in the middle of the night and keep anxiously worrying about things. I don't have to keep rehearsing the conversations. I don't have to allow my mind to fear every outcome. Because God, I believe your camp is real. And I believe your angels are real. And I believe that your presence is real. And I believe that you are fighting for me and for my good. Why? Because we cannot live in the new identity that God has given us while we still try and manage our old one. God's camp is prepared. His angel armies are there. The question isn't if God's going to show up in our life. The question is, are you and I willing to settle in God's camp?